Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to COASTER-net Updates. We've got some breaking news this evening out of San Antonio, Texas, where we've just learned that Six Flags Fiesta Texas will be building a brand new roller coaster in 2018. Woman Golden Lasso Coaster will be presumably the first ever single rail track made by RMC to be installed into a park. It will be a Raptor track, meaning, it will have the very thin rail on it. And also, it's going to have the 8-person train. Single seat, single file, single seat, 8 people. Danny, what are your thoughts about this Raptor track going into Fiesta?
Well, this happened earlier this morning, and I think when this got announced early this morning, it was about 8:30 Eastern time is when I started having people text me and message me, because we didn't know that they were going to make like a formal thing. We knew they were making an announcement this afternoon, but I guess it kind of got let out to Texas Thrill Seekers and some other groups a little earlier today, and I immediately had people texting me and messaging me, and I texted you immediately to see if you had seen it, and I you being out in Vegas, you were still asleep at the time.
It's like 6 a.m. Why would I be awake?
It's like 6 a.m. and all of a sudden you were like, "What did I see?" And then I was like, "Here." I was like, "Here, let me call you." And you're like, I could tell you're like half asleep, and you're like, "Oh." And we started looking at this thing, right? So my initial reactions were, oh, okay, we're getting a T-Rex at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. That's cool. Like, let's see what it's going to do.
You're not.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I was like, wait, no, this isn't a T-Rex. This is the Raptor. And then I got worried. And I immediately got worried, and everybody got worried for the same exact reason that I got worried. And we've gone down this path before with Six Flags rides and its capacity. And I think the way I put it to you earlier today is Six Flags gave up on caring about capacity when they started putting in the free flies, and the Larson Loopers is the other one you brought up. And, even some of those spinning coasters to a point. Now, the spinning coasters are a little bit different because you've got several blocks. But the free flies are 8 people per dispatch, essentially. And you've got maybe a 1 minute and a half ride. This thing is going to be a 1.5 minute to a 2-minute ride with 8 people. You've probably got about 20 to 30 seconds for the lift hill, 20 to 30 seconds for the brake run. You've probably got a minute of action on the ride itself. This is a 2-minute ride here that we're looking at, Woman Golden Lasso Coaster. So, best case scenario, let's say you're dispatching trains every 2 minutes, because that's how long the ride's going to take. 8 people per train. And that doesn't matter if you have 1 train, 2 trains, 8 trains. If you dispatch a train every 2 minutes, that's 30 dispatches per hour at 8 people per train. That's 240 riders per hour. Best case scenario. Now, to put that in perspective, a boomerang holds 28 people per train. So if you were to dispatch a boomerang every 6 minutes, that's 10, or every 6 minutes, which would give you 10 dispatches per hour. That gives you 280. And people know how terrible boomerang lines can get when you dispatch a train only every 6 minutes. Imagine 10 cycles on a boomerang an hour would still be doing more people per hour than this ride would at what I envision as the best case scenario. So that's why I get very, very worried here. And as you mentioned, this is going to be more popular than a free fly. This is going to be something that looks good. This is going to be something that looks like it's more exciting and less gimmicky. So that's where my concern comes in here, is that this is a slightly different scenario. This is going to be a ride that people are probably going to want to re-ride, as opposed to the free flies, or even like a boomerang where it's like, it's once and done, or kind of beat my head up. This should be a very, very smooth roller coaster. This should be a very, very enjoyable roller coaster. This should be one that people are going to re-ride. So I think the capacity monster might rear its ugly head more so here than it has in the past.
Well, I'm absolutely a little concerned about the capacity, having been in a
everybody is.
Well, having stood in a large loop line to the point of frustration where I left Six Flags Over Georgia because now you're also adding in Flash Pass to the scenario as well, and that's even going to further compound that line. And you might not be getting 8 people, each train. 1 or 2 of those rows might be Flash Pass people. So you might only be getting 6 people every dispatch coming out of that line. So there's a lot of concern there, I think. I don't know what they're going to do because there's no like Fury staging section out the station where you could put another train on the track. The brake run looks like it might be able to hold a second train. It looks like a single load station. So it looks like this is it. It looks like there's no special gimmicks here from what we see from this initial rendering.
No mid-course.
It doesn't look like
there's no mid-course where you could have maybe, one train on the first half, one train on the second half. I mean, this is what you're going to get. This is going to be one of those rides that could potentially have very, very long waits on the busy days of the operating season. So we not to be punny here, but we've railed on the capacity thing here enough. So let's talk about the ride itself, because a lot of people seem to be very excited about this, which I think there's reason to be excited. It's a new concept to a point. I'm not going to say it's something brand new and something we've never seen before. I mean, we've seen similar things before here. We've seen single rail type roller coasters. B&M rides have 2 sets of tubular rails, but they're kind of joined by a box beam, so it's somewhat similar in that regard. But I get the whole idea that this is a first of its kind to a certain extent. I understand that. So I understand the hype for it from that perspective that we're going to see.
Except if you count all those old-time coasters and those coasters like out, in Europe and Asia that already have single rail on it, where there are plenty of coasters that have single rail type concepts on it that don't run tubular track. There's plenty of examples out there.
Yeah, and I mean, you could even go back to the old Aero steeplechase rides, like the ones that are still at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I mean, we've seen a single rail type concept done before. Now, I get that it's RMC, and I get that we're in the 21st century here, and RMC is, the new kid on the block, and they're the hot topic right now, and anything that they do is going to get a lot of excitement. So I get that aspect of it. Absolutely. I understand the excitement from it. I'm excited for it. I'm glad that I didn't go to Texas this year, because now between Wave Breaker last year, Switchback the year before, we've got this now. We've got a lot of new things. Six Flags Over Texas has a Joker now. So, the Texas trip is slowly piling up new coasters from when I went in December of 2013. So there's a lot of things to make a Texas trip attractive here. But as far as now, I'm going to just strictly talk about the ride for a second. And I think the way I put it to you is this. To me, if you take out the fact that it's a new concept, and if you made this a B&M looping coaster with this layout, and you took away the capacity thing and you put a B&M looping train on it, what does this remind you of? To me, the layout, the length, and everything reminds me of the smaller B&M dive coasters that we're seeing, like a Baron 1898, or even the one that is opening up next year at Liseberg in Sweden. I think it's Valkyrie or Valkyria. I forget.
Valkyria.
Yeah. It's got the 90-degree vertical drop, sans holding brake, as far as we know. So just you go up into a dive loop. You've got a nice little crossover airtime hill. You've sort of got an upward helix. You've got another drop in there somewhere. You've got some overbank turns. You've got a corkscrew. To me, as far as the layout goes, this is kind of similar to what I think Valraven kind of is, or maybe like a Baron 1898, maybe a little bit more than that. But in terms of number of elements, it kind of strikes me as in that category, because you've got the vertical drop, you've got a couple inversions, you've got some overbank turns, you've got some twists. This doesn't strike me as, a massive coaster, because it's 113 feet. I mean, let's put that in perspective here. This is smaller than your big aero loopers like your Vortexes at Kings Islands and your Vipers at Magic Mountain. Don't be fooled by the renderings here, because the fact that this track is so small makes it look like it is much, much larger than it actually is. People get tricked all the time with Fury and Leviathan. They say, well, that doesn't look like it's 325 feet tall. That's because the track on the lift hill is so freaking large and it's so big. When you look at it from a distance, you lose the scaling of it. This is working in the opposite direction, because this is not much taller than Storm Chaser. This ride is not much taller than Wicked Cyclone. This ride is pretty much the exact same height that they're saying RMC Hurler is going to be. It looks like it's a lot larger because the track is so much smaller. So don't be fooled into thinking that this is a ride that is going to tower above the skyline here, because this ride is smaller than Iron Rattler. This ride is smaller than Superman Krypton Coaster. This ride is smaller than the lift hills on the Boomerang. This ride is closer to the size of Poltergeist. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this. This is not a massive ride. This is a medium-scaled roller coaster here, and that's the way I'm taking it. And if you go into it expecting a medium-sized steel looping roller coaster, I think this is going to be a fantastic ride. But I think people are maybe being misled by the rendering and the fact that it looks massive when it's not. And I think people understand the capacity issue, but I don't think they fully grasp just how bad the capacity could be on this ride.
Yeah, and you know, when I looked at it, and I heard that it's going to be somewhere right above 51 miles an hour, putting it in that same range of all the other RMCs that are about 40, 45 miles an hour. So you're not going to, also in the same range of the Intamin Megalights, which I think there might be some comparisons. Now, I thought you brought up a good point earlier when we discussed that there doesn't seem to be a lot of airtime hills on this, that we don't see the typical RMC airtime hills. We don't see the typical, Intamin airtime hills, that this is more of a looping coaster than it is an airtime machine. That I don't think you're going to see a lot of points on this ride, especially given how fast it's going, to get really extreme airtime on it. Now, some of those, overbanks, maybe you will, but we know from the other RMCs that you really don't. Like on Iron Rattler, you really don't get a lot of throwing out of your seat motion on the overbanks that you would on maybe even, to some reports on Storm Chaser. And also looking,
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, when you think about it, let's look at the layout here, because I have the sort of the overview here. If you want to look at spots where you're going to get airtime, you're going to get airtime on the first drop, no doubt. A vertical drop is going to do that. You might get some hang time in the dive loop. I would expect that to happen if we know RMC's dive loops, and we don't have many dive loops to go off of from RMC. I mean, Goliath has one, but that's kind of really all we're looking at here. You've got this weird sort of crossover hill, which I would assume would have some airtime. Then you'll probably have airtime on that next drop, and then you might have some hang time on the overbank and the corkscrew, and then you might have a little pop going into the brake run. So I could see there being 5 or 6 spots on this ride where you come out of your seat. But half of that might be hang time in the inversions. I don't think we're looking at a Wicked Cyclone where there's 14 moments of airtime here where you're being popped out of your seat, whether it's for a long duration or a short duration. That's kind of a moot point. I don't think this is like a Storm Chaser where you have all these little hills where you're being popped up out of your seat. Again, whether it's for a short amount of time or a long amount of time. It's not New Texas Giant where you have these double ups and, all these hills. You're not going to have 14, 15 moments of airtime here. You might have 5 or 6. And I think people, because it's being made by RMC, people are automatically assuming that there's going to be a ton of this ejector airtime. And we have to take a step back here and realize that this is not the style of ride that we are used to seeing from RMC. This isn't a lightning rod with a quad down and all these overbank turns. This is really meant to be a mid-sized steel looping coaster, which is, when you think about it, I guess maybe you could argue whether or not Fiesta Texas really needs that. I mean, they have Iron Rattler, which has a loop in it. They have Krypton Coaster, which is kind of a high-end looping coaster. Poltergeist, you know, and Boomerang are maybe your mid-range looping coasters. Does this fit into the Fiesta Texas lineup? Well, I don't know. I don't know that this is the style of ride that they needed based on what they have. That having been said, you and I did discuss the other night in a show that we actually did the night before that this aired, and is actually never going to get posted because we talked about what might be coming. You know, we talked about how Fiesta Texas has seemed to be the proving ground for some of these new concepts. You know, they got an RMC early on. They got the free fly. And we thought that maybe they would be the place that we would see a first of its kind. And you and I picked the wrong type. We talked about maybe getting a Pulsar clone or something similar, a Mack water coaster. And instead we're getting the RMC Raptor. So we kind of had the idea right. We had the wrong concept.
Yeah. Well, you know, and what's also interesting is I think moving away from the ride a little bit, you know, well, to put a cap on that, you know, when I first saw it, I kind of said, well, this is kind of like your modern day aero looper. If you take away that first drop, that first 90-degree drop, I think there's a lot of similarities, and you don't have standard vertical loops. You have a lot of different inversions, but I think you're going to get a lot of the same feeling out of it between like a B&M dive or an aero looper or something like that. But, you know, a lot of people have been talking about Fiesta Texas. You know, we even speculated that, you know, we said, why would a park get 2 RMCs for these reasons that you brought up? Well, now we have a park with 2 RMCs, so I think that chips off the board there. So you wonder if this ride is now going to be cloned at a lot of the other Six Flags parks. You know, whether it's cloned or even you know modified slightly.
Well, and to be fair, you and I kind of took that. You know, we kind of took that argument head on a while ago, because we said if RMC is going to be doing ground up steel coasters with this type of track, with the T-Rex and the Raptor track, there's no reason that a park can't have 3 RMCs. They could, I mean, very clearly, Fiesta Texas is going to have 2 and still has a gaping hole in their lineup because they don't have a wood coaster. So Fiesta Texas 3-4 years down the road could easily add an RMC wood coaster. They'll have 3 RMCs that are completely different roller coasters, and nobody's going to bat an eye about it. I mean, Six Flags Great Adventure has what, 5 or 6 B&Ms? You've got a stand-up, a flying, a floorless, an invert, a hyper, and I mean, they don't even have a dive coaster. So I mean, there's parks that have 5, 6 B&Ms and nobody really bats an eye because they've got so many different styles. This is what we're seeing RMC becoming. They're not just doing the wood coasters. They're not just doing the topper track. This is what RMC is becoming. And they can do the single rail. There's no telling where they'll stop. I remember in the Outlaw Run documentary, Fred Grubb said, there's nothing we won't do with the wood coaster. And he's a man of innovation. They're a company of innovation because they've been doing new things here and there. They've tried the launch coaster. I'm not going to say they're not afraid to try a launch coaster because we've seen how that's worked out, but eventually they're going to get it right if they keep doing it. So there's plenty of opportunity for RMC to have 5, 6 completely different styles of roller coaster. And if this concept here works, there's no reason they can't flip it upside down and make their own version of an inverted roller coaster with this. Now, again, that's maybe a little bit tougher sell because a lot of parks seem to have that style already. So that might be a slightly tougher sell unless you go on a smaller scale. But I don't think there's any reason to think that this is where it ends for RMC in terms of innovation and new concepts. So I guess that's a really exciting part of this too. But it's very, very clear now that there could be 3 RMCs at Six Flags Fiesta Texas another 3-4 years from now, and nobody's going to have any problem with it. And there are going to be 3 completely different rides. So I think that's another thing to take away from this.
Well, and the last thing that I think a lot of people have been talking about is where does this leave California's Great America? Is that they've been teasing the Project SR1 for a very long time now. And some people have speculated that, based on Matt Ouimet's comments that the single rail would be Cedar Fair's first time, and people are like, oh, Six Flags beat them to the punch. But Danny Miller, let me say for a second here, I don't think for a second that California's Great America was getting a Raptor track. I think California's Great America has always been penciled in to get that T-Rex track that RMC has showed off at IAAPA in different places and at the factory. And I think you might also see to fit the world's first with based on the teasers that we've seen and possibly the name Railblazer, if you buy into Railblazer going to Kaga. Maybe it will be a launched, single rail track, which would still make it, guess what, Danny Miller? A world's first.
Yeah. So, and people talk about, I think the term Matt Ouimet used was something we haven't seen before. So you can kind of translate that how you wish. And you and I think the same way we jumped on the Knott's bandwagon a little later because we were originally on the Worlds of Fun bandwagon, we kind of got on the single rail to Kaga later because we always thought we would see maybe like a water coaster at a tilt coaster, and then we went back to Canada. And we thought that was maybe something, and maybe that brings it back into play here. Interesting note, RMC did post on their Facebook page about this Wonder Woman ride and talked about, we're excited to, announce that one of our Raptor coasters for next year is going to Six Flags Fiesta Texas. And there's a bunch of different ways you can translate that. But a lot of people translated that to mean that there's more than one because the phrasing was done in such a way that it implied that there was more than one because it said one of our Raptor coasters for next year. It's not like they said that if they would have said next year, one of our Raptor coasters is going to Fiesta Texas. That makes it seem like, okay, this is the first one, but there's going to be more later. They said it in such a way that it was like one of our Raptor coasters next year. Like they phrased it in such a way that it implied that there's more than one. And I think that's dicey only because if they were working with both Six Flags and Cedar Fair with a single rail, knowing that both companies were going to want this claim of having the first single rail, unless they go launch at Kaga and they do something like that, then otherwise you have a really bad conflict of interest right there, and they're going to piss somebody off.
Exactly. And that's a case of enthusiast bullshit right there, because there is no way that a company like RMC would promise a world's first to a company like Cedar Fair, a company that has much more opportunity for business to do with them than Six Flags does at this point. Mm-hmm. Six Flags has basically run the course on the Iron Horse treatments. They can obviously put more single rails all over the place, but Cedar Fair still has opportunity to do both of those and has a bigger cash opportunity knowing that they put in big rides. So why you would piss off Cedar Fair by saying that they were going to get something and then have Six Flags just be able to announce it early doesn't make a whole lot of sense, Danny Miller. That's called enthusiast bullshit. That's made up by somebody. That is not what is happening here. Either Matt Ouimet was being cagey and saying we're going to have something you've never seen before, which is still technically true, even if it does turn out to be Raptor track. But I think there's a little more to it. I don't see Cedar Fair installing a Raptor track ride for the reasons that we've already stated here. I don't see how, even at California's Great America, you get past that very low capacity at a major Cedar Fair park. I think you're going to irritate a whole lot of people, especially the way they do Fast Lane, which is you can just marathon it all day long. So you buy the highest tier of Fast Lane at California's Great America, and you could have the same people riding it, and you would have how many people entering the queue line. So I think we're going to see something completely different at California's Great America. I think it'll be T-Rex, maybe a launch, and maybe Cannon's back in the mix all of a sudden. I love that ride for some reason.
We keep going back there because, if I look on the good old roller coaster database right now and I look it up, I mean, there is no...
Still nowhere. Limbo.
It's nowhere. We have no idea where it is. So, it certainly seems like that is still in play as far as this goes. Now, that's something that we came up with, something that you came up with really a long time ago. Whether or not that actually is in play, we don't know. We know that Cedar Fair has been getting rides from Europe. So the question is whether or not they would get a roller coaster from Europe. I don't know, but
they flirted. They flirted with the Schwarzkopf Scorpion clone out in England. They flirted with buying that one, and they determined that it just wasn't up to speed. It would take way too much money to restore.
Too much metal fatigue in a ride that old.
Probably,
Well, and you know what? That's an interesting thing here with how small these rails are. If this, not to get into this topic, but I wonder because, you would figure that there's going to be a decent amount of forces on this track here. If the whole Dragon Challenge thing really closing down after 18 years because of metal fatigue, with how small this track is, how long is this ride going to be around? Because this track is certainly much smaller. I'm not gonna say I'm worried about that because I have yet to see any bona fide proof that that's really why the Dragons are closing down, and that's a topic for another show. But there's a lot of interesting things that can be discussed about this ride opening, which I think is why this show has gone, a little bit longer than our normal updates. It's kind of like a cross between an update and an uncut here, because there's a lot of things. This answers 2 or 3 questions about Fiesta Texas, but this creates a whole lot of other questions about everything else, because a lot of our discussion for 2018 is hinged on Cedar Fair getting a single rail. We did not anticipate anything RMC going to Six Flags aside from maybe a free fly and maybe an RMC Georgia Cyclone. So this kind of throws a little bit of a wrench into everything else for 2018.
Well, I thought this morning that, this takes a big chip off the board, and like you said, creates a lot of questions in how the other chips are going to fall now because of this chip coming off the board so early. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I think, at the end of the day, I think that this looks like to be a ride that I'm going to like. I don't think I'm going to love it. I don't think I'm going to have it in my top 25. But I think this is a ride that could very well, enter into my, the way I like my Batman clones. And I feel that we're going to see a lot of Wonder Woman clones because you don't have a lot of Wonder Woman rides out there, do you now? That we just saw one go in at, Six Flags America and Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. So this is one that you could actually just clone a lot of places. And you said something really interesting is they did not use the quarry at all within this layout. And you wonder if that's because they're going to clone it and they're going to start putting it in all different parks and they don't want to have to redesign.
Yeah, that's a missed opportunity in my book. I mean, we talked about on our show that we'll never air how the teaser was that the water will stay, and that's why we were kind of pointed towards maybe a Pulsar clone. And I mean, it's literally just the pond of water is staying there, and the coaster is going over it. I think it's a missed opportunity not using the quarry wall, but I think that's very telling that they wanted a design easily copy and pastable, if you will, into other parks, because at the end of the day, it does take up a small plot of land. My guess in terms of cost, you're probably looking at the $12 to $15 million range here. Now that might go down in the future because obviously Six Flags probably had to foot some of the research and development costs since it's a new, you've got new trains, it's a new style of track. That's not completely funded by RMC for sure. So I think, you're maybe looking at the $12 to $15 million range, which is similar to Valraven, similar to Storm Chasers. So I think, that's a reasonable estimate to see what the cost is here. I haven't seen a cost figure. Six Flags doesn't typically give cost figures. So I think that's telling right there for sure. The fact that it might be easily clonable, the fact that it's going into a fairly small plot of land. And I did have one other point that I wanted to make, and now I completely forgot about it. You were talking about how I can't remember. There's so many different things to talk about here. What was the last thing you said before you talked about the quarry wall? You talked about one other thing before that. Maybe that'll jog my memory here.
I don't know. I talked about the quarry wall and it being cloned was the last two things. Anyway, I think we can wrap it up at this point.
Yeah. Well. I remember now. So thank you. So this does check off one of the 5 Six Flags or North American firsts or record breakers. Yeah. So this does satisfy one of those requirements, and we did figure about a month ago that Six Flags Fiesta Texas would have to be one of those parks that would do that. So that's 1 for 1 on that front. And you and I also mentioned that if they were going to do a free fly somewhere like Six Flags Over Georgia, they wouldn't be able to go Batman and they wouldn't be able to go Joker, and we didn't know where they would go. I think this is maybe an indication that, that we're going to start digging into some of the other characters. We've seen them go into Green Lantern before, and Wonder Woman, they've done flat rides. They're going to start doing Wonder Woman roller coasters pretty clearly. So, maybe Wonder Woman is the next character to get a line of rides, because we've seen some of the Harley Quinn Spin Sanity rides. We've seen the Joker. We've seen Batman run its course. So maybe, and we've seen, like you said, some of the Wonder Woman flat rides already. The Sky Screamer, the Lasso of Truth at Magic Mountain is a roundup. The Giant Discovery, I believe, at Discovery Kingdom. And now a roller coaster. So maybe Wonder Woman is the next character that is going to be getting her own ride, line of thrill rides here. So those are the other 2 things that I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
So.
Well, as of course, we'll keep you updated on what's going on here at Six Flags and what's going on with all the other parks. That's been really interesting so far. We've got a big chip off the board now and a big announcement here at the beginning of August. So we'll see how the rest of the month plays out. So as, of course, from Las Vegas, Nevada, I'm, of course, Andy Rabarchak.
And Danny Miller, Binghamton, New York.
And as always, ride on, Ride Warriors.
See you next time, guys.